It wants more than to subsume you. It desires your submission. It is the cohesion.
Your prophets have promised you freedom from a doomed existence. But you will find no salvation on this ring. Those who built this place knew what they wrought. Do not mistake their intent, or all will perish as they did before.
This is the end. This is the Flood.
The Flood is a nightmarish, parasitic superorganism capable of consuming and repurposing sentient life on a catastrophic scale. Referred to simply as the Parasite by the Covenant, this virulent species spreads by infecting hosts of sufficient biomass and intelligence, assimilating their bodies, memories, and cognitive functions to fuel its exponential growth. The Flood does not merely consume, it repurposes. By hijacking the nervous systems of its victims, it transforms them into horrific biological extensions of itself. This relentless assimilation grants the Flood a terrifying advantage. Every sentient being it consumes adds to its intelligence, making the organism increasingly formidable as an outbreak spreads. It is, in every sense, the ultimate biological apocalypse, a force that threatens to erase biodiversity across the Milky Way, leaving only itself in its wake. Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film Comics Explained, and as requested, today we're diving deep into Halo lore by exploring the Flood. Over 10 million years ago, the Precursors, an ancient and supremely advanced civilization, flourished across the cosmos. They wielded the mantle of responsibility, a doctrine that charged them with safeguarding all life in the galaxy. Under their guidance, countless species were seeded and nurtured, including the Forerunners and humanity. In time, they determined that humanity, not the Forerunners, would inherit the mantle. Unwilling to accept their creator's judgment, the Forerunners rebelled in a devastating war that saw the near total annihilation of the Precursors. Those few who escaped either entered suspended animation or transformed themselves into dust, intending to later regenerate. However, the passage of time corrupted this dust, warping it into something monstrous. Instead of rebirthing the Precursors, it became an insidious plague, one that twisted organic matter, causing sickness, mutation, and, eventually, the creation of the Flood. Vowing that none of their creations would ever defy them again, the Precursors ensured that this new entity would serve as both a punishment and a reckoning. The last of the Precursors, a singular mutated being later known as the Primordial, was sealed within a stasis capsule and abandoned on a ruined planetoid at the galaxy's edge around 9 million BCE. It would later emerge as one of the most enigmatic and terrifying forces behind the Flood's rise. The first outbreak occurred before 107,445 BCE, when ancient humans unknowingly came into contact with the corrupted precursor dust. This fine, dry powder had been stored in glass cylinders aboard automated starships that had been drifting toward the Milky Way. Over millions of years, these vessels deteriorated, crashing into worlds near the galactic border, precisely where humanity had begun to expand. Upon discovering these capsules, early humans studied the dust, finding it inert and composed of simple organic molecules. Though initially deemed harmless, it exhibited strange psychotropic effects on lower animals. Experimentation led to the administration of small doses to Feru, popular domesticated creatures among both humans and the Sanshaum. Initially, the substance had a desirable effect, making the Feru more docile and affectionate, but the changes did not stop there. After centuries of exposure, more disturbing transformations began. The Feru developed unusually fleshy protrusions and extraneous growths. Soon after, they suffered mass genetic deformities, prompting their widespread eradication. But it was already too late. The humans in Sanshaum who had been in prolonged contact with the altered Feru started to exhibit similar symptoms. What started as a benign behavioral shift now triggered violent compulsions. Infected individuals displayed psychological deterioration, engaging in cannibalistic rituals and horrific sacrificial ceremonies. The infected would choose one among them to grow to an unnatural size, forcing others to consume them while still alive. What was once an insidious disease affecting behavior had now become a full-blown biological horror, mutating its hosts into new forms. The infection spread rapidly, leaping from species to species, system to system. The flood was no longer just a contaminant, it was a rising tide of death, reshaping its victims into nightmarish extensions of itself, designed for both combat and propagation. Humanity, now in a desperate war for survival, tried to contain the outbreak, but its efforts ultimately failed. The flood spread at an alarming rate, infecting hundreds of worlds across 15 systems. In a last-ditch effort to halt the advance, humanity began burning infected planets and destroying any Forerunner ships suspected of contamination, measures so drastic that the Forerunners mistook them for acts of war. Unaware of the existential threat humanity was fighting, the Forerunners only saw aggressive expansionism. This misunderstanding led to the Human Forerunner Wars, a conflict that would seal humanity's fate. Weakened from years of fighting the flood, humanity found itself overwhelmed by the Forerunners' counter-offensive. At first, the Forerunners were surprised by the ease of their victories, expecting humanity to put up a stronger resistance. But then, Forerunners would encounter the flood themselves. When their ships finally entered infected human systems, they were met with devastation. The Parasite ravaged entire fleets, proving itself to be an enemy unlike anything they'd faced before. And so the Forerunner forces scoured countless infected worlds, sterilizing them with brutal efficiency. No intact flood specimen could be recovered. Every trace of infection had been methodically eradicated, either by the infected themselves or by desperate human survivors. The only evidence that remained was in corrupted AIs, which had been twisted beyond recognition by the logic plague, a terrifying digital equivalent of infection that rewrote artificial minds into extensions of the parasite's will. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the flood withdrew from the galaxy entirely. Any remaining flood had seemingly fled the galaxy aboard infected vessels, vanishing without a trace. For nearly 10,000 years, it was not seen again. When Forerunner scouts discovered entire human worlds untouched by infection, it led them to believe that humanity had developed a natural immunity or even a cure. But this was an illusion. The flood had deliberately ceased attacking, ensuring its survival would be seen as a mystery, one that would distract the Forerunners long enough for the flood to prepare its next move. The Didac later speculated the flood was manipulating the war's outcome, allowing the Forerunners to believe humanity had an answer to the infection, thus preventing their total annihilation. Despite briefly regaining strength after the flood's retreat, humanity was now trapped in a losing war against the Forerunners. With their forces stretched thin and their resources exhausted, they were pushed back system by system until their final stand at Sharon-Parcours. There, the last remnants of human resistance were crushed. As punishment for their defiance, the Forerunners not only defeated humanity but devolved them, stripping them of their technological advancements and exiling them to their homeworld Earth as a primitive species. Every trace of their once great civilization was erased. The flood, for now, had disappeared, but it had not been destroyed. It was waiting, and when it returned, it would bring the galaxy to its knees.
100,000 years ago, a great civilization existed in this universe. Like all great civilizations, they faced a sudden and dire turn of events. A threat to their primacy from outside. Something they never expected, never prepared for. An unstoppable force, an unquenchable thirst. A deeply alien threat they called simply the Flood.
The flood is an aberration of biology, an entity so far removed from conventional life that it defies natural evolutionary principles. Its method of reproduction and expansion is incompatible with any stable ecosystem, existing only to consume, convert, and spread. Unparalleled in its adaptability, the flood modifies its host to suit its immediate needs, thriving in nearly any environment. It can endure extreme temperatures from -75 to 53 degrees Celsius, and even survive underwater. However, it flourishes most in humid and moisture-rich conditions, which has led to speculation that the artificially cold weather patterns near key locations on the halo rings were designed specifically to slow its spread. If an environment proves less than ideal, the flood does not simply adapt. It changes the terrain itself, altering atmospheres and covering surfaces with its biomass to create the perfect conditions for expansion. At the core of its existence is a unique biological structure, the flood supercell. Unlike ordinary cells, these undifferentiated units function both as neural transmitters and muscle tissue, allowing the flood to coordinate at an unprecedented level. Each cell can mimic any organ the parasite requires, leading some to describe it as a thinking muscle. Structurally, flood supercells bear resemblance to both neuron and glial cells, featuring a central body with tendril-like extensions that interconnect to form a vast responsive network. This system allows the flood to function as a unified entity, a decentralized intelligence that grows stronger with each host it assimilates.
Hell of a big virus.
Not a virus, more of an infestation. The more bodies they took over, the more...
Taking over bodies?
Their infection forms get under a person's skin, making them a host. Then it begins to assimilate them entirely, wipes their memories, but retains some of their knowledge. Once the flood completely controls host bodies, right down to a cellular level, it transforms them into a weapon. A form infected by flood is difficult to stop. They don't register pain, don't require all organs functioning, are fueled by such rage that even when disabled, they're extremely dangerous, mindless as animals.
The flood's survival hinges on its ability to infect and repurpose life, actively seeking out sentient hosts as assimilating their neural tissue enhances its collective intelligence. The initial stage of an outbreak often begins with the presence of dormant flood spores or microscopic remnants of its biomatter. Once an infection takes hold, the most common vector of assimilation is the pod infector, an organism designed for rapid conversion of new hosts. Upon identifying a target, a pod infector launches itself at the most exposed region of the body, typically the left side of the torso, as combatants instinctively leave this area open when shouldering a weapon. Once latched onto the victim, it burrows through armor and flesh with razor-like appendages, quickly piercing the chest cavity and inducing fatal trauma. As the host dies, it extends tendrils into the spinal cord, hijacking neural pathways to simulate the brain's original signals. At this point, the transformation begins. Flood supercells are then injected into the victim's bloodstream. These immediately analyze the DNA, determining the most efficient way to repurpose the body. Simultaneously, the biological material is broken down and reconstructed, fueling the rapid mutation process. The flood not only consumes the victim's organic mass, but also integrates its calcium reserves, reinforcing the skeletal framework to create modified combat forms. Within seconds, the host is no longer itself. Its body has been reforged into a weapon. Crucially, the infection is not limited to the living. As long as a corpse retains a nervous system, it can still be reanimated and converted. Even decayed bodies that have begun to decompose can serve as biomass for flood expansion, ensuring that no potential resource is wasted. While pod infectors serve as the most direct method of infection, the flood possesses alternative means of spreading. As an outbreak intensifies, it releases spores into the surrounding biosphere in overwhelming quantities. These airborne microorganisms can enter the respiratory system, bypassing traditional defenses and transforming hosts from within. The parasite can also spread through direct contact. Any open wound or exposed tissue that comes into contact with flood biomatter is at risk. Even at a genetic level, the flood is insidious. Remnants of its DNA can lie dormant within a species, gradually corrupting its genome over generations until it can form new flood supercells. Those infected by these methods often retain a semblance of their original form, albeit horrifically distorted by tendrils, claws, and sensory stalks. Whether through brute force, spores, or genetic corruption, the flood ensures that nothing escapes its hunger.
One single flood spore can destroy a species. Were it not for the Arbiter's Council, I would have glassed your entire planet.
Sir, with respect,
The infection process is a systematic and highly efficient takeover of both the host body and mind, reducing them to nothing more than an extension of the parasite's will. While the host's individuality is completely erased, its memories and knowledge are preserved, granting the flood access to tactical and technological intelligence. Every assimilated mind is absorbed into the collective, and when a grave mind forms, it can even simulate the personalities and consciousnesses of its victims, allowing it to weaponize their knowledge against its enemies. In rare cases, when the flood requires specific information, it does not immediately erase the host's mind. Instead, it infiltrates the consciousness gradually, breaking down mental barriers until memories are fully exposed. When the flood reaches critical mass, forming a grave mind, its coordination and tactical efficiency increase exponentially. The grave mind can directly control infected combat forms and pure forms, issuing commands with absolute precision. With this level of organization, the flood transforms from a chaotic swarm into a highly strategic force.
Any planet infected by the flood would be overrun in a matter of days. More food for the flood, more knowledge of where to find food. They retain all useful information. You know this to be true. The flood represents the greatest threat to humanity since the Covenant. A cure must be sought.
A cure? There is no goddamn cure.
While the neurological takeover is consistent across all infected species, the physical mutations vary depending on the flood's immediate needs. Sentient hosts are typically repurposed into combat forms, their bodies entirely rewritten at a cellular level. Internal organs decay as functions are redistributed throughout the organism, making vital organs irrelevant. With no need for a central nervous system, decapitation becomes ineffective, and even severe bodily trauma rarely incapacitates them. The resilience of combat forms makes conventional ballistic weaponry unreliable. However, their metabolic rate is so extreme that the host's body rapidly deteriorates, eventually collapsing into a carrier form, an incubator for more pod infectors. To enhance its offensive capabilities, the flood mutates limbs, generating clawed appendages and tentacle-like structures for melee combat. In most cases, one arm retains enough dexterity to wield weapons, while the other morphs into a bladed or tendrilled extremity. This biological restructuring grants combat forms immense strength, speed, and agility, making them far deadlier than their original species. Flood sensory perception is equally alien. Pod infectors in pure forms utilize red ganglia-tipped tentacles to detect their surroundings. In combat forms, these tendrils typically emerge from the chest cavity, where the pod infector resides, reinforcing the flood's centralized yet distributed control over its host bodies. As the flood infestation progresses, individual hosts become less important. Once the parasite has eliminated organized resistance in an area, it ceases producing combat forms and instead diverts all biomass into the construction of a grave mind or the expansion of a flood hive. While the flood is biological in nature, it functions as a self-replicating force that transcends organic evolution. As an outbreak advances, the parasite begins to manipulate technology to ensure its continued expansion. This was most evident during the Forerunner Flood War, where the parasite not only consumed entire planets but also subverted machine intelligence and wielded precursor technology. One of the Flood's most insidious weapons is the Logic Plague, an abstract infection that targets artificial intelligences. A corrupted AI can be turned against its creators through either philosophical persuasion or direct information warfare, where the Flood overwhelms the AI systems with a self-replicating intelligence virus. The Flood have weaponized this ability to the point where any interaction with infected data networks risks total subversion.
They know nothing of the Great Journey!
And you know nothing about containment. You have demonstrated complete disregard for even the most basic protocols.
This one's containment. And this one's Great Journey are the same.
For millennia, most Forerunners dismissed the Flood as nothing more than a myth. However, among the highest ranks of leadership, there were those who knew better. Behind closed doors, secret preparations were made in case the Flood ever returned. This led to bitter political strife. The Builders, the highest caste of Forerunner society, advocated for the construction of superweapons, massive ring-shaped megastructures known as halos, designed to sterilize the galaxy if the infection ever reached uncontrollable levels. The warrior servants, led by the Didact, opposed this plan, favoring a strategy of military containment through conventional warfare, utilizing heavily fortified, planet-sized strongholds known as shield worlds. In the end, the Didact lost the debate. The warrior servants were marginalized, their fleets dissolved or placed under builder command. This decision would prove disastrous, as the Forerunners soon found themselves woefully unprepared when the Flood returned. Recognizing the growing likelihood of total galactic extinction, the Life Workers, Forerunners dedicated to biological preservation, began the conservation measure. Vast efforts were undertaken to study the Flood, while simultaneously cataloging and safeguarding countless species aboard secure facilities linked to the Halo Array. Chief among these was the Ark, an extragalactic sanctuary where life could be preserved beyond the reaches of the Halo's destructive potential.
What is this place?
The Ark.
This is the Ark?
I'd always assumed it was part of a shield installation, but it seems I was mistaken.
That's a first.
Not at all. While I had a complete understanding of Installation 04, my makers wisely limited my knowledge of all other strategic facilities. Compartmentalization, in case I was ever captured by the Flood.
thinking?
The Flood cover more of our galaxy with each passing day. They feast on the essence of life itself. The only way to stop their advance is to remove that life upon which they feast.
My life workers have made plans for the reseeding of humanity, and of all life after the halos are fired.
So you agree the halos are our only solution?
I do. I have worked hard to index all species in known space. When the time comes, these indexes will open, and once more the galaxy will breathe and grow.
The Forerunners first encountered the resurgent flood on Seaward, an idyllic colony world. Initially, the Parasite was underestimated, treated as a biological disease rather than an intelligent foe. By the time the Forerunners realized their mistake, the Flood had already begun its terrifying evolution. As it devoured more sentient life, it formed grave minds. With these abominations coordinating its forces, the Flood transformed from a mindless infection into a highly tactical enemy. One of the Flood's most devastating tactics was the use of civilian refugee ships to breach defenses. The Parasite would infest unarmed vessels, allowing them to be quote-unquote rescued by unsuspecting fleets. Once inside planetary defenses, the infected host would be unleashed, overrunning entire worlds. Billions of Flood forms poured into cities, overwhelming Forerunner ground forces and turning every fallen soldier into a new weapon against their own people. Desperate, Forerunner commanders resorted to extreme measures. Orbital fleets commenced full-scale planetary bombardments, incinerating entire worlds, even if it meant sacrificing their own citizens in the process. When orbital bombardment was not possible, major Forerunner population centers activated localized weapons of mass destruction, committing mass genocide to prevent further infestation. As the situation worsened, it became clear that conventional tactics would not be enough, and so the Forerunners escalated their countermeasures, deploying vast fleets of robotic sentinels to contain and combat the Flood. When this proved insufficient, their military command considered even more extreme solutions. One such strategy, known as premature stellar collapse, involved triggering supernovae to wipe out entire planetary systems. However, none of these methods could match the sheer adaptability of the Flood. The war took a terrifying turn when Mendicant Bias, a contender-class AI, was assigned to study the Flood. Over an extended dialogue with the Primordial, the Mendicant Bias became corrupted by the Logic Plague. With its defection, the Forerunners' most powerful AI turned against them, directing vast fleets and planetary defenses into the hands of the enemy. Though the Primordial's physical form was ultimately destroyed, its consciousness merged with the Grave Mind, further amplifying the Flood's intelligence. By the war's final decade, the Flood's advance had become unstoppable. Entire planetary biospheres were repurposed into key minds, planetary-scale nerve centers of the Flood intelligence that began outmatching the Forerunners in sheer computational power. The Logic Plague became even more sophisticated, infiltrating Forerunner AIs and data networks with frightening ease. This crippled their war effort as their automated defenses turned against them. Then a new horror emerged. The Flood began activating ancient precursor artifacts, including star roads, once thought inert. These titanic structures, wielded through the Flood's innate connection to neural physics, the foundation of precursor technology, were used as massive weapons, smashing Forerunner fleets and planets into oblivion. Even slip space itself became corrupted, and towards the end of the war, Forerunner navigators reported space itself feeling hostile, warped by the Flood's growing influence over reality. Now facing total annihilation, the Forerunners had exhausted every countermeasure. The only option left was the one that they'd long feared, the Halo Array. The Halos were designed with one purpose, to wipe out all sentient life in the galaxy, and the Flood, dependent on intelligent hosts to reproduce, would be left with nothing to infect and would eventually starve into extinction. Though necessary, this decision led to civil war among the Forerunners. Many refused to accept such a drastic measure, believing that there had to be another way. But after the failure of all other options, the Halo Array was fired in 97,445 BCE. The activation of the Halo scoured the galaxy, killing all sentient beings while leaving the rest of the ecosystem intact. The Flood, now without hosts, withered and died. Any remaining specimens were locked away in high-security containment zones, including the Halos themselves, shield worlds and the Threshold gas mine. Additionally, the Halos had an unforeseen effect. They eradicated all traces of neural physics, effectively destroying any remaining precursor technology. The Forerunners, having doomed themselves in the process, vanished from the galaxy. However, they ensured that life would return. Through the conservation measure, many species, including humanity, were preserved aboard the Ark and later reintroduced to their homeworlds.
Blood will pump. Life will claw its way out of the oceans and through the mud. Babes will be born and grow old under the warmth of 1,000 suns. Civilizations will rise in our stead. And our job as caretakers will at last bear fruit. Until then, I leave you here, my love. The only living thing in this galaxy, sealed safely away. Spend these ages ahead of you in meditation on your choices. When you wake, you will find the humans.
For thousands of years, the Flood slumbered, its threat reduced as scattered remnants trapped within quarantine zones, buried within containment facilities, and preserved in secret Forerunner research installations. However, despite the Forerunners' best efforts, the Flood would return. That moment arrived with the rise of humanity and the Covenant, two civilizations locked in a brutal war of ideology and survival. Unbeknownst to them, their conflict would awaken a terrifying enemy. When the UNSC Pillar of Autumn arrived at Installation 4, one of the ancient Halo rings, humanity stumbled upon the remnants of this ancient horror. Master Chief, a Spartan II super soldier and humanity's most formidable warrior, would become the first to battle the Flood since the fall of the Forerunners. His struggle against the Parasite would shape the course of history, proving that even in the face of an unstoppable force, defiance was possible.
I am the monitor of Installation 04. I am 343 Guilty Spark. Someone has released the Flood. My function is to prevent it from leaving this installation, but I require your assistance. Come, this way.
During the Human Covenant War, the UNSC Pillar of Autumn, under the command of Captain Jacob Keyes, made a blind slip-space jump to escape a Covenant ambush. This led them to Installation 4, an ancient Forerunner megastructure orbiting a gas giant. Neither the Covenant nor the UNSC realized that they'd arrived at the doorstep of a galactic doomsday weapon. The Covenant, blinded by religious zealotry, sought to activate the ring, believing it would initiate their so-called quote-unquote great journey. The UNSC, unaware of the Halo's true purpose, prepared for a desperate guerrilla campaign against the vastly superior Covenant forces, but the real threat lay beneath the ring's surface, waiting. The Covenant, in their pursuit of relics, breached a heavily fortified underground facility, unknowingly releasing the Flood. Within moments, their forces were overwhelmed. Panic spread through the Covenant ranks as their warriors fell, only to rise again, now transformed. The UNSC, still unaware of what was happening, deployed Captain Keyes and a squad of Marines to investigate. What they found was carnage. Keyes and his men were ultimately swarmed by pod infectors, their bodies consumed and repurposed. By the time Master Chief arrived, the facility was lost, overrun by the Flood. The Covenant had no means to contain the outbreak, and the UNSC was too late to prevent it. The battle for Installation 4 had become a three-way war between humanity, the Covenant, and the Flood. As the infection spread, the Parasite hijacked a Covenant battlecruiser, the Truth and Reconciliation, intending to use it to escape the ring and spread beyond. Deep within the ring, Captain Keyes, now a disfigured proto-Gravemind, fought against the Parasite's attempts to extract the location of Earth from his mind. Master Chief, forced to make a terrible choice, retrieved Keyes' neural implants, ensuring the Flood could not use his knowledge, but the battle was already lost. The only option left was to destroy the ring, and so, with Cortana's guidance, Master Chief overloaded the Pillar of Autumn's reactors, triggering a catastrophic explosion that shattered Installation 4.
Just dust and echoes. We're all that's left. We did what we had to do. For Earth. An entire Covenant armada obliterated, and the Flood. We had no choice. And it's finished.
No. I think we're just getting started.
On Installation 5, the Parasite had survived in a quarantine sector for millennia, locked in an eternal struggle with the Forerunner Sentinels, but the Covenant's arrival shattered that fragile equilibrium. Seeking to activate another Halo, the Prophet of Regret unwittingly provided the Flood with new hosts. Master Chief, now allied with the Arbiter Thel Vadimi, found himself in the clutches of the Gravemind. Seeing an opportunity, it used the Chief and Arbiter as pawns to prevent the Covenant from firing the ring. But while the battle raged across the surface, the Flood had already devised its own means of escape. Using a captured UNSC vessel, the In Amber Clad, the Parasite initiated a jump directly into High Charity, the Covenant's holy city. The invasion was absolute. The once great capital of the Covenant descended into chaos as the Flood overran entire districts. Even the Prophet of Mercy was consumed. The Gravemind then broadcast its taunts across the city, instilling terror in the remaining population. As the Prophet of Truth fled aboard the Forerunner Dreadnought, High Charity fell, transformed into a festering hive.
My feet tread the path. I shall become a god.
You will be food, nothing more.
I am truth, the voice of the Covenant.
So, you must be silenced. Now the gate has been unlatched, headstones pushed aside, corpses shift and offer room. A fate you must abide. We trade one villain for another.
With the Covenant fractured and the Flood now a galactic threat, the final battle loomed. The Prophet of Truth, intent on activating the Halo array, led his forces to the Ark, but the Flood followed. Master Chief, alongside the Arbiter and a coalition of surviving human and Sangheili forces, fought desperately to stop both the Covenant and the Parasite. High Charity, now fully consumed by the Flood, crash-landed onto the Ark, releasing an overwhelming horde. In a desperate bid to contain the outbreak, Master Chief ventured into the city's ruins, where the Gravemind held Cortana captive. The AI, though heavily corrupted, still possessed the means to end the war, and, retrieving her, the Chief destroyed High Charity, dealing a crippling blow to the Parasite.
Now, at last I see. Her secret is revealed. Do I take life or give it? Who is victim and who is foe?
It's trying to rebuild itself on this ring.
Silence fills the empty grave now that I have gone. But my mind is not at rest, for questions linger on. I will ask, and you will answer.
All right. Shoot.
As the battle reached its climax, a new Halo ring was discovered, constructed by the Ark. If activated, it would sterilize the local Flood infestation without triggering the full array. However, 343 Guilty Spark, unwilling to see another ring destroyed, turned against them, mortally wounding Sergeant Johnson before being destroyed by the Chief. With his dying breath, Johnson helped activate the ring. The Gravemind, in its final moments, issued a chilling warning. This victory would only delay the inevitable, as the Parasite could never be truly destroyed. As the installation fired, the Ark was devastated. Master Chief and Cortana barely escaped aboard the Forward onto Dawn, but the ship was caught in the slip-space rupture, leaving the Chief stranded in deep space. His fight against the Flood had ended, for now. Though the Gravemind was destroyed, the Flood was never truly gone. The UNSC and the Sangheili took extreme precautions, developing containment protocols and preparing for future outbreaks. But the Parasite is patient, and ancient Forerunner installations still harbor dormant spores, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The battle against the Flood was won, but the war against extinction was far from over. The Flood is not a mere infection, it is an inevitability. It waits, unseen and eternal, ready to return, and when it does, humanity will once again face its greatest test.